right. It says excellent connection. I think we're ready. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. Welcome to all of you to our next question-answer, satsang session. I'm surprised there are a lot more questions this week. I'll do my best to get through the questions. If I don't make it to your question, I apologize in advance. I have to say I'm really impressed by the quality of the questions. Very thoughtful and very relevant and appropriate. So I'm grateful to get such questions. First question comes from Kartik. Doesn't say where Kartik lives. He says, how to deal with toxic people. What a not nice expression. Interesting that we use that expression so commonly in modern times. Should we get away from them? And what can we do in situations when others keep attacking and bullying us as it leaves scars and traumas in the future? Absolutely true. How to deal with toxic people? Well, if you can get away from them, my guru liked the expression, love them from a distance, which means treat them with respect, but don't associate with them to the extent that it's possible. But many times it's not possible. Then what? So you are forced to interact. You have no choice. The dharmic thing is to interact with these apparently toxic people. Well, if there's some toxin, this is a bad metaphor, I apologize in advance. If there's some toxin that they have, you should vaccinate yourself in advance before interacting with those people. And in this case, the vaccination is meditation and the teachings of Vedanta. Meditation and these teachings will help you be less affected by their behavior. Of course, if you're enlightened, then you're not affected at all. But in this intermediate region, that is between being a student and becoming enlightened, in that region, these teachings, to the extent that teachings have gone in, and meditation. Meditation is maybe underappreciated somehow. Meditation blesses you in so many ways, and not just in terms of spiritual growth, even in terms of dealing with worldly problems like toxic people. You'll be surprised at how much a regular practice of meditation can help you. So this is like a preemptive, medical people like this word, prophylactic. So this is a proactive way of preparing yourself to deal with these so-called toxic people. Okay, that is Kartik's question. Next is Diego, who lives in Mexico. Diego refers to, we've discussed how the many texts say that these teachings are secret. And we've discussed that secret doesn't mean that they shouldn't be told to anyone, but secret refers to the nature of teachings that if you tell what did I say before? They are so secret that when you tell something, they're still secret. That's what our Vedantic texts mean when they refer to a teaching as being secret. And the reason these teachings remain secret even when you tell others is because unless you have the proper preparation for these teachings, it won't go in. So these teachings are meant for properly prepared students, properly qualified students. So this is Diego's question. What would make a person qualified for the highest teachings of Advaita Vedanta? Qualified maybe isn't the best word, although we use it often. Properly prepared. A properly prepared student, actually starting with the in the Upanishads and then later by Shankaracharya, we've a list of several requirements, of several required steps of preparation are actually defined. Viveka, Vairagya, Samadhi, and Mumukshutvam. I'll just describe these very briefly. Viveka means discrimination, discernment, I think is a better translation. The ability to discern in a very Vedantic sense, that which is real from that which is unreal or less real. That which is changing from that which is unchanging. That which is the conscious observer from that which is observed. So in so many ways, this kind of discernment is a prerequisite then for the teachings of Vedanta, and one of these four major steps of preparation. The second one, Vairagya. Vairagya literally means dispassion. Obviously, as long as you're committed to gaining happiness and contentment through worldly pursuits, why will you even bother with the teachings of Vedanta? So here, Vairagya means dispassion towards worldly pursuits to the extent that you can focus your attention on Vedanta. Then the third is actually a set of 6, and I don't want to get into the details of each of these 6 sub-qualities, if we can call them that. Together, they refer to a condition of emotional and spiritual maturity. Notice I said emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is actually a prerequisite. And the reason for that is if a person lacks emotional maturity, they'll be thrown off by they'll get upset and disturbed again and again and again. And these constant disturbances, emotional disturbances, are a huge obstacle to following the path of Vedanta. So Shama Dhamma Uparati Tatiksha Shraddha Samadhanam. I just will kind of summarize these together. So emotional maturity and commitment to these teachings. Shraddha, Samadhanam, meditation, a mind that has been prepared through meditation. But of the 4 steps of preparation, the 4 prerequisites, we can call them, Viveka, discernment, Vairagya, dispassion, the third one being emotional and spiritual maturity. The fourth one, without question, is the most important, and it's simply mumukshutvam, desire for liberation. And this is I spoke a moment ago about commitment. So this being committed to gaining enlightenment is the starting point, obviously, for all of this. And that's the fourth and most important of these prerequisites. The fact is that he says, what would make a person qualified for the highest teachings of Advaita Vedanta is Diego's question. So you might think that for the highest teachings of Vedanta, you need the highest qualifications. It doesn't work like that. The way it works is we come with whatever degree of preparation we have, and then while we are engaged in these teachings, we constantly become more and more prepared. There's a wonderful metaphor to describe this. First of all, clearly it's a non-linear process. It's not that step A, get prepared. Step B, study Vedanta. That's the linear approach. This is an incredibly non-linear approach in which you are simultaneously becoming more prepared while you are currently engaged with these teachings of Vedanta. The brilliant metaphor, I love this metaphor that's used. So when will that fire of knowledge take place? This is a metaphor. When will the fire of knowledge finally ignite and take place? And the answer is when you're prepared. And the metaphor is, suppose you're trying to light a pile of wet twigs. You have a big box of matches, and you light a match. You hold it under the wet twigs. Obviously, they're not going to catch fire. They're wet, which means they're not prepared. So you light another match, hold it underneath the twigs. They still don't ignite. And a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, they still don't ignite. But with every match, they dry out a little bit. And when those twigs are sufficiently dried out through all the prior matches, it only takes one more. And this is a nice metaphor to describe how the process of preparation takes place. Through the teachings of Vedanta, we gradually become prepared. And when we're sufficiently prepared, that fire of knowledge, so to speak, takes place. Good. Nice question from Diego. Next, from Hiranmoy. Doesn't say where he lives. And Hiranmoy asks, for a worldly man, what is the simplest way to know Brahman? You know, there is a really important, heartfelt question here. But the language is problematic. If you're truly worldly, then it means you have no inclination towards spiritual growth. So for a person who's truly worldly, I'm sure Hiranmoy is not a 100% worldly person. If he were, he would not have written this question. But somebody who is 100% worldly, they'll never discover Brahman, because it's only discovered when you are on a spiritual path, not on a worldly path. And the simplest way to know Brahman, and again, I think Hiranmoy has a sincere dedication to these teachings, but the way it's expressed is problematic. Because the simplest way to know is like, what's the simplest way to learn computer programming? What's the simplest way to learn, mathematics or something else? This is not an academic pursuit. The goal is not some kind of spiritual, to be honest. The spiritual knowledge is not the goal. Spiritual knowledge is the means to the end. The end is not spiritual knowledge. The goal, the end, is actually freedom from suffering in this lifetime and freedom in any future lifetime, freedom from being reborn. So for the sake of gaining freedom from suffering, we call that goal moksha. But for the sake, moksha means freedom, liberation. And in this case, freedom from suffering and freedom from rebirth. But for the sake of gaining that moksha, you require a very powerful kind of spiritual realization. You can say that spiritual realization is not intellectual, conceptual knowledge of Brahman, not academic knowledge, but rather the personal, immediate realization or recognition. And that recognition is not of some Brahman out there. It's really recognition of your true nature as being non-different from Brahman. That's a big topic. We won't go into it. So I hope this has, I think, addressed Hiranmoy's question. Then Kishan. Kishan lives in Bangalore. Again and again, with so many questions from people living in Bangalore. And he asks, is it possible for an enlightened person to be completely peaceful within and sometimes gets irritated in his mind, and experiencing both those experiences simultaneously without getting mixed up. And it depends on what you mean by irritation. How about an enlightened person drinks too much coffee? You get jittery. Jittery is kind of it's a form of irritation, right? Your brain and mind is irritated by all that caffeine. So the enlightened person can be enlightened and jittery at the same time. There's no conflict at all. But if by irritation, if what you mean is angry, it doesn't happen like that. The anger is the result of actually just to examine it, what makes someone angry? And there are many ways to explain it, but a common way is when you feel transgressed upon, when you feel attacked, and generally not physically attacked, but emotionally attacked or intellectually attacked or socially attacked. It's some kind of attack. You get outraged. How can you say that? How can you do that? You experience that anger. An enlightened person will never feel attacked because you can't attack consciousness. An enlightened person is one who is completely identified as being Satchidananda Atma, pure consciousness. An enlightened person is one who is utterly disidentified with the mind, with the body, with social roles. So if someone were to attack that the social role of that person, what a funny memory. Years ago, I used to travel a lot and go teaching everywhere. And I'd always wear this dress because it's a traditional dress, traditional robes of a traditional Swami and a traditional teaching order. And anyway, I think it would be disrespectful of me not to wear this kind of dress. So I remember, I was teaching a class at a library in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And as I forget, I'm going in or out of that library, and someone made some rude comment. Some young people made some rude comment about how I looked and what am I doing here? I really don't remember. It was decades ago. Now here's the question: should I get offended? Oh, how dare you say that? I'm a traditional Swami. I've been ordained in India. I've studied for all these years. Or if these teachings have really gone in, why would I be offended? And I wasn't. So that's the idea, is that if a person is truly disidentified with the body, mind, and that includes social roles, and if you are completely identified, my true nature is Satchidananda Atma, pure consciousness which is unchanging consciousness that can't be affected by anything, such a person wouldn't be irritated in the sense of becoming angry in any sense at all. So irritations like jitteriness or something like that, minds are minds. In fact, let me make that point before we conclude here for Kishan, and that is, no one has a perfect mind, including an enlightened person. So I'm not saying that an enlightened person has a perfect mind. What I am saying is that an enlightened person is free from anger. Okay, then that's Kishan's question. Next is Kartik, who lives in Andhra Pradesh. Karthik asks, how can I stop my, these are all good questions. How can I stop my obsession with material things like money and sex while practicing Advaita Vedanta? Despite my efforts to follow a spiritual path, I often find myself taking spirituality for granted and being controlled by my desires. Well, I congratulate Karthik for being very open and honest with this question. And obviously, Karthik isn't the only one to face these issues. Early on in one's path of spiritual growth, everyone experiences this conflict. I certainly did when I was a young man. I felt so conflicted about worldly activities and my spiritual practice. And I struggled with that for years and years. Everyone struggles with that year after year until, fortunately, that struggle eventually comes to an end. Not quickly, though, for most people, at least not quickly for me. When does that struggle come to an end? The struggle comes to an end when you finally learn how to truly practice karma yoga. Everyone talks about karma yoga, but it's not properly understood in most situations. Karma yoga involves, karma yoga is a huge topic. There are so many aspects to it. Let's just take one. That'll hopefully answer Karthik's question. And it's this. When your spiritual studies and self-inquiry has advanced to a point, and especially when your studies of Bhagavad Gita and other teachings of karma yoga have gone in, what happens is a transformation of your thinking. And transformation of your thinking in this way. You no longer see spiritual growth as one of your many goals in life. And we all start out like that. I certainly did. There are many, when I was young, there are many, many things I wanted to accomplish in life, and one of those things was spiritual growth. This is our starting point. But over a period of time, and especially if you properly study karma yoga, and especially if you study Bhagavad Gita properly, what happens is your priorities get restructured, and maybe in several steps. First, that spiritual growth early on, you have many goals in life, and spiritual growth is one of many. And then later, spiritual growth becomes the most important goal, in addition to all the others. That transition from spiritual growth being one of many to spiritual growth being your primary goal, that leads to a radical change in how we think. Our behavior is based on our values, what we think is important. We devote our energy to what is most important. And if spiritual growth is one of many goals in life, then your energy is divided amongst all these many goals. So a little bit of spiritual growth, little bit of working in your profession, little bit of having fun with your friends, whatever it is, your energy gets divided amongst all these many goals. But when the teachings of karma yoga leads you to put spiritual growth as the most important goal, not that the other goals are erased, but it becomes the most important goal, then a change of your values takes place, a change of your worldview, and that gets reflected in your behavior. And then it goes a step further. You can imagine where this goes. Eventually, spiritual growth is not your number one goal, in addition to many other goals. Eventually, spiritual growth is your only goal. Now, that doesn't mean you withdraw from worldly activities, because if you have worldly responsibilities, to withdraw from those responsibilities would be adharma, and you can't be on a spiritual path and at the same time commit acts of adharma. But it's another inner transformation. It's a shift of your values. It's a shift of your worldview. So the first shift is where spiritual growth becomes the number one goal among many. And then the second shift is where spiritual growth becomes the only goal, and worldly activities are still performed as a kind of spiritual practice, which is karma yoga. So the answer to Kartik's question is really karma yoga. Karma yoga is really not properly understood. If you want to get a small dose of karma, not a small dose, a brief introduction to karma yoga, there's a video I put out about a year ago. There was a video, I think The Secret of Karma Yoga, I think is the title. I highly recommend watching that video. I think it'll help a lot. Okay, now there's Kartik's question. Next from Guillermo. Guillermo lives, yogi, lives in Scotland. And he asks, Brahman is one consciousness. I am Brahman and so are you. I experience physical sensations or thoughts mediated by consciousness. I'm not sure about the word mediated. We'll come back to that. Why can I not experience the itch on your leg? And why don't I know your thoughts? Why don't you know my thoughts? Is a common question. And set Brahman aside, just stay with consciousness. There is one, and yogi understands, there is one all-pervasive consciousness. What you call your consciousness or my consciousness is not yours or mine. There is one all-pervasive consciousness that is simultaneously manifest in your mind and simultaneously manifest in my mind. One all-pervasive consciousness manifest in all minds. So then that leads to Yogi's question. Why don't I know your thoughts? Why don't you know my thoughts? And the answer is found if we say, who's asking the question? Because consciousness doesn't have questions. Consciousness doesn't ask this question. It's true, it's the same consciousness in your mind. It's the same consciousness revealing your thoughts is the same consciousness that reveals my thoughts. And you understand that properly. But here's the point. The question you're asking is a question born of your mind. And clearly, your mind is different from my mind. The question is not born of consciousness. The question is born of your mind. Our minds and bodies separate. Okay. Next, Ajay, who lives in Melbourne, Australia. Nice to get questions from all over. Ajay asks, why does the mind snap and get provoked even when raga and dvesha are defeated? Observing this afterwards, there is absolutely no suffering before or after the incident when the pure state of consciousness is clear and continuous without any suffering in the form of regret. And it feels bizarre that the mind is still incongruous, meaning not conforming with the inner pure state of consciousness. This is Ajay's question. Little complicated. So it sounds like Ajay is an advanced spiritual practitioner, and most of the time he finds himself, in his language, without any suffering or regret. He feels most of the time. But then, according to Ajay, occasionally the mind snaps, and I suppose you get angry, even when raga and dvesha are defeated. So the question is, are raga and dvesha totally defeated? There is a stage of spiritual development in which you have discovered your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, a stage in which you can feel the sense of utter contentment and peace, and you know that there's nothing you need to accomplish for the sake of your well-being. But the mind is very habitual. And even after making this discovery of your true nature, the mind can be so habitual, and sometimes this is in the background, and it sounds like for Ajay, it's very much in the background. What can happen is the raga and dvesha are still present as old habits of the mind. In Advaita Vedanta, we talk about the habitual nature of the mind, usually in terms of habitual identification with the body and mind. This is the most common kind of habit of the mind, where we call it deha vasana. Deha means not just the physical body, but the subtle body as well, including the mind. Habitual identification with the body and mind is present for almost everyone, even after they discover their true nature as Satchidananda Atma. The mind does not become perfected by removing ignorance about your true nature, just to make a very obvious thing. When you remove the ignorance about your nature as Satchidananda Atma, you've got plenty of other ignorance left over, right? Ignorance about the Chinese language, ignorance about the C++ programming language, etc. And you get my point. So the point is, the mind is not perfected by gaining self-knowledge. Those defects can hide out in the mind because they're deeply programmed into the mind. For the sake of removing those programmed defects, what we call the habitual defects, the Sanskrit term for it is called viparita bhavana. Bhavana, a feeling or condition, that is viparita, opposed, opposite to your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. For the sake of removing that viparita bhavana, these hidden habitual problems of the mind, Vedanta provides a practice called nididhyasana. Nididhyasana means Vedantic contemplation. And nididhyasana is not optional. It's part of Vedanta sadhana. Vedanta sadhana we always speak of in three ways: Shravana, Manana, and nididhyasana. Shravana is the initial process of self-inquiry guided by these powerful teachings until you finally discover your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. But having made that discovery, there's a lot of work left to be done. It's the initial discovery. Here we have to deal with the so-called baggage the mind has. A lot of problems, impediments that the mind will still have. Impediments like doubt and vagueness. It's not uncommon. You make that initial discovery, but that discovery is not crystal clear. There's vagueness. And that discovery may be accompanied by many doubts about various aspects of these teachings. So for the sake of removing these doubts and vagueness, we have a practice called manana, which is reflection on these teachings after making the initial discovery of your true nature. And then finally, shravana, manana, last, nididhyasana, Vedantic contemplation to remove this viparita bhavana, these habits of the mind. Anyway, very common problem, but a very important problem to deal with. Next question is from Gavin. What are we doing here? Looks good. Okay. Gavin, who lives? Gavin lives. It doesn't say where, and that's okay. Gavin asks, does the subtle body travel if it doesn't have a container? So the physical body is like a container, and the subtle body fills the physical body and enlivens the physical body. How does a subtle body travel if it doesn't have a container? In fact, if the subtle body has a container, it can't travel. It's stuck inside the container, which is why Hindus burn their dead to destroy the physical body and symbolically release the subtle body to travel onwards. That which has a container is stuck in a particular place. That which has no container is not limited to a particular place. For that reason, the subtle body can travel and get associated with another. His question goes on: why doesn't the subtle body disperse once the physical body is dead? And he says, and he refers to my explanation, which is karmic glue. Can you throw more light on this, please? So notice that when you burn a physical body, the physical body returns to physical elements. The ashes, carbon, oxygen and carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere. So the physical body returns to physical elements. Why doesn't the subtle body return to subtle elements? According to the teachings of the ancient rishis, physical things are made of physical elements. Non-physical things, like your mind, think about mind, is a non-physical thing. You wouldn't say the mind doesn't exist. The mind exists. But it's not a physical thing. It has no weight. It has no size, no shape. You get the point. So physical things do return to physical elements at the time of death. Why doesn't the subtle body return to subtle elements at the time of death? And Gavin refers to my explanation, karmic glue. And what I mean by karmic glue is this. Karma is a law of cause and effect. And by the way, it's a fairly complex topic. I'll try to present in just summary here. By the way, there's a series of videos on the doctrine of karma. So if you have questions about this and the doctrine of karma, I highly recommend watching those videos. In particular, there's one, Who Travels? That video in particular, I think, will address Gavin's question. And here's a brief answer. Law of karma is the law of cause and effect. And according to that law, when you die, you have committed actions for which the effects have not yet occurred. So those effects are pending effects. They are yet to occur. And since the law of cause and effect applies, since the actions have been done, the results must eventually take place. We say they must be fructified. For the sake of the fructification of those results, which are pending, then those results have to be reaped or experienced by the person who committed the action. The person who committed the action is associated with the subtle body. For the sake of ensuring that that individual person associated with an individual subtle body, to ensure that that person reaps the unfructified results of past actions, the integrity of that person and the subtle body must be maintained by the laws of karma. So the laws of karma, universal laws, somehow maintain the integrity of the subtle body so that these past karmas can be fructified. That's a very brief explanation. I think in that video I mentioned you'll find a much more elaborate explanation. Next question is from Michael. And Michael asks, interesting question. Brahman is always accompanied by a manifest state and an unmanifest state. I'm not sure this is relevant. We'll come back to it if necessary. As Brahman can never stand alone, separated from the manifest and unmanifest states, how can we say that Brahman is an independently existing reality? I'll make sense out of this in just a moment. If Brahman can't exist without them, isn't Brahman reliant or manifest? It's I think I get Michael's question quite clearly, but it's hard to express that. Okay, he refers to the clay pot, and this is absolutely how in fact, I was probably referring to a time when I used this example. In this metaphor, Brahman is the clay, and pot is the world. So the question, here we understand that this pot exists because of clay, like the world exists because of Brahman. This is the metaphor we've used so many times, and it's a helpful, extremely helpful metaphor. So therefore we would say that Brahman is the underlying reality because of which the world exists, just like clay is the underlying reality because of which this pot exists. Further, we could say that Brahman is more real than the world. Our definition of real is in terms of permanence. This pot can come and go, the clay would remain. If I break the pot, clay remains. So clay is more permanent than pot. For this reason, we would say that clay is more real than the pot. In the same way, even the whole universe can come and go. 14 billion years ago, this universe didn't exist. So even the universe can come and go, but the underlying reality because of which the universe exists doesn't come and go. In this way, we understand Brahman to be more real than the world. Now, question of independence, which is Gavin's question. Clay exists independent of the pot, which means if the pot is broken into shards, clay still exists. If the pot is ground up, if the shards are ground up into dust, clay still exists. If that dust is mixed with water and becomes malleable, clay still exists. And if that wet dust is made into a different kind of pot, go full circle here, clay still exists. So this is, in Sanskrit, nama rupa, name and form. This name and form can undergo any number of changes. Brahman remains unchanged. That which remains unchanged, we say immutable, akshaya. What is the other word I'm looking for? Akshaya is fine. An immutable, unchanging reality, Brahman. In that sense, Brahman is independent. But now, if I understand, and I think I understand Gavin's question, and the question would be like this: can you ever find clay without some kind of form? This is clay in the form of a pot. You could have clay in the form of shards. Can you find clay in the form of dust? clay in the form of soft clay. But can you find clay without any form whatsoever? Clay without any form whatsoever is not a worldly reality that we can experience. We only experience forms. The world of experience is a world of forms. If clay has no form, that clay can't be experienced. Does that make sense? When clay has a form, it can be experienced. If clay has no form whatsoever, we only experience things that have form. So formless clay is an idea or concept. By the way, if you study Plato, this is one of Plato's main things. He considered things to be ideas. So the idea of clay. Vedanta has a similar concept. So now let's apply this metaphor. We experience Brahman manifest as a universe. Brahman is manifest as this chair. Brahman is manifest as this body. Brahman is manifest as everything. So, this is Brahman's manifestation that we experience. Suppose Brahman has no manifestation. What's taught in Advaita Vedanta is at the end of each cycle of creation, the universe undergoes dissolution and exists in an unmanifest state, which means Brahman exists, but the world is unmanifest. There's nothing to experience. Of course, there's no human beings to experience anyway. So Brahman, when the world is unmanifest, is not an experiential reality. But note, this is going to be a little technical, but I think it might address part of Gavin's question, if I understand the question right. Notice that Brahman, in the presence of an unmanifest universe, and this is a little technical, so if it's too much for you, tune out for the next 3 minutes and then tune back in. This is quite technical. Brahman, in the presence of an unmanifest universe, is still Saguna Brahman, not Nirguna Brahman. As soon as we're talking about anything at all, we're talking about Saguna Brahman. Saguna Brahman with an unmanifest universe, Saguna Brahman with a manifest universe. So that Brahman, I think this is part of Gavin's question, is Nirguna Brahman ever existing without gunas, without the world, without anything, like clay existing without any pot, without any form whatsoever. Here we've got a problem, because it's not that in this metaphor with the clay pot, it's not clay always had some kind of form. There was never a time when clay didn't have a form. In the same way, Brahman is always accompanied. Nirguna Brahman is always, 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 timelessly, eternally associated with the universe, either in a manifest or unmanifest form. So there never was a time when Nirguna Brahman was unaccompanied by Saguna Brahman, or the world in a manifest or unmanifest form. Okay, these are 3 minutes are over. This is a technical part. You can tune back in. This is to answer, I'm sorry, I used the wrong name. That was Gavin was a prior questioner. This is Michael. So this is Michael's question. I hope that was helpful. Pretty complicated. This is Uma. Uma lives in Hyderabad. And Uma asks, I like this question. I understand karma siddhanta, the doctrine of karma, is a plausible theory. Good. which is used to explain various incidents and happenings around us in life, also explains birth and rebirth. Of course, all of that is helpful. Karma Siddhanta, unlike Karma Yoga, completely different, Karma Siddhanta has nothing to do with Advaita Vedanta. That sounds like a very bold statement, but it's absolutely true, because Advaita Vedanta has the subject matter of Advaita Vedanta is the reality of who you are, the reality of the universe. The reality of you is Tvam. The reality of the universe is Tat. The reality of you is Satchidananda Atma. The reality of the universe is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, and they are identical. That is the subject matter of Advaita Vedanta. Everything else is tangential. Now, when I say tangential, it doesn't mean unimportant, because without all these other teachings, including Karma Yoga, you won't gain that highest knowledge of Vedanta. Really speaking, even Karma Yoga is tangential. Prayer is tangential. Meditation is tangential. Tangential, but essential. Now, with that in mind, Karma Siddhanta has nothing to do with Advaita Vedanta. We would say that Karma Siddhanta is not the topic taught by Advaita Vedanta. That much is absolutely correct. Whereas Karma Yoga helps in the process of Advaita Vedanta. I would take a slightly different perspective than Uma is taking here. Karma Yoga is helpful. Presumably, if someone were an Uttama Adhikari and an extraordinarily mature and prepared student could gain enlightenment without Karma Yoga, such an Uttama Adhikari could gain enlightenment without prayer, without meditation, without anything else for an Uttama Adhikari, but we know that no one is really that qualified. All of us come with our shortcomings, and because we come to Advaita Vedanta with our shortcomings, we need all these auxiliary teachings, all these auxiliary spiritual practices, including Karma Yoga, meditation, etc. I would put Karma Siddhanta in that same category because it's helpful to gaining enlightenment. Like Karma Yoga is helpful, like meditation is helpful, I would say that the doctrine of karma is helpful. Why is it helpful? It helps us cope with the complexity and challenges of life. If we don't cope with the problems of life, we'll get so caught up in those problems, we're not likely to make much progress in our spiritual life. So it's an important coping mechanism, we'll call that. So Uma's final question is, based on the above, can we say that that the enlightened person is not reborn, is not a teaching of Advaita Vedanta? It's correct, but not maybe for the same reason you're thinking. An enlightened person doesn't get reborn according to the doctrine of karma. According to Advaita Vedanta, an enlightened person was never born in the first place. So if an enlightened person is not born in the first place, nor does he or she die, then what is the point of rebirth? So Advaita Vedanta teaches that there was never birth or rebirth. So the idea that there's no rebirth for an enlightened person, technically speaking, is not part of the core teachings of Advaita Vedanta, the central teachings of Advaita Vedanta, but as part of an auxiliary teaching, that auxiliary teaching being the doctrine of karma, what Uma nicely calls Karma Siddhanta. All right, how are we doing with time? A few more. A lot more. We'll see. We'll see. Okay, that's a little. This is from Cody. Cody asks, if our true self is Atma, pure consciousness, that means we are all that same consciousness, we are all one and the same. So what is the difference between me and Ishvara, the cosmic God? Am I God? And this, our friends in ISKCON continue to accuse Advaita Vedantins as saying, I am God, I am God. It's a misunderstanding. How about this? Your physical body, relationship between microcosm and macrocosm. Ishvara is the macrocosm. You and I are microcosm, meaning your physical body is a part of Ishvara's body. This is taught in Advaita Vedanta. Your physical body is part of Ishvara's body. Your mind is part of Ishvara's mind. Your prana, life force, is part of Ishvara's life force. Your intelligence is part of Ishvara's intelligence. We're related as part and whole. From that level, I certainly can't say I am God, because I've got this tiny little body. Ishvara's body is the entire cosmos. I have this tiny little mind. Ishvara's mind is the intelligence of the universe. So you can't say I am God is just an untenable question. Where there is identity is not at the level of body and mind, not at the level of microcosm and macrocosm, but at a deeper level of reality. We can say, truly we can say, that the consciousness of Ishvara and the consciousness of you and me are not different. One consciousness. One consciousness manifest at a macrocosmic level, same consciousness manifest at a microcosmic level. So at the level of consciousness, there's no distinction. But that consciousness is not Ishvara. Ishvara is the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of the cosmos. I am not the creator, sustainer. At best, I can create a few videos. I can't. That's all I can do. So you get the point. So at the level of body and mind, there's no equivalence whatsoever. The only place there is equivalence is at the level of this higher reality, one consciousness. All right, that was Cody's question. Next from Sanjay. Sanjay lives in Mumbai. Oh, actually, Sanjay's question about Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. Sanjay, I think my answer to Michael's question answers your question exactly. So I think if Sanjay is listening, I think your question was already answered. All right. Next. Prasanto. Prasanto. I like the Bengali names. In Sanskrit, Prashanta. Prashanta means peaceful. In Bengali, Prasanto. How's my Bengali pronunciation? Prasanto. All right. By the way, I'm certainly not making fun of Bengali. I love Bengali culture. Rabindranath Tagore has been my hero for long. Okay. According to Advaita Vedanta, avidya, ignorance, prevents us from gaining moksha. Avidya belongs to the mind, so essentially enlightenment happens in the mind when our inherent ignorance is replaced by pure knowledge or destroyed by pure knowledge. Correct, absolutely correct. Enlightenment takes place in the mind. Prasanto has understood properly. However, when someone is enlightened, there should be no individual to claim, I am enlightened, because that false I is dissolved in ever-present consciousness. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. What it means is, suppose I'm going to say, I am conscious, I am enlightened. Well, who is enlightened? Body doesn't get enlightened. Mind, who is saying that? Who says I am enlightened? I think this is Prasanto's point. The one who says I am enlightened is an individual person. An individual person, jiva, ego, ahankara. How can that individual person possibly say, I am enlightened? This is Prasanto's question here. It's a good question, and it's tricky to answer. Because, he says, because the false I is dissolved in ever-present consciousness. And this is where things get tricky. I, the false I, is what we call ahankara, sense of individuality. And we've discussed before that this sense of individuality is an organizing principle in your mind. When that ego is completely absent in your mind, you can't function in the world. A good example is when you get absorbed listening to your favorite music. In that state of absorption, the ego indeed is dissolved into consciousness. You're just floating in that music. It's lovely. But in that state of absorption, you can't do anything. So, ego, ahankara, sense of individuality, the false I, and that's a fine definition that Prasanta uses. That false I can get dissolved in consciousness, like in that state of absorption, but if an enlightened person always has one's ego in a state of dissolution, that enlightened person can't function, can't interact with others, can't talk and walk and eat and sleep. So there's a problem with this. And this is very subtle, but I'll give you an easier way to understand it in just a moment. The subtle point is this, and my guru used this expression, which is unique and helpful. He speaks of an enlightened ahankara, an enlightened ego. An enlightened ego means the ego is still present in the mind. The so-called false I is still present in the mind as a functional unit. It helps you function in life. It's an organizational part of the mind. But an enlightened person knows it's just a thought. It's just a mental activity. It's just a little thing that my mind does, and it's a helpful thing that my mind does. So, in theory, an enlightened person could actually say, I am enlightened, because that so-called false I is still present, but as an enlightened ego. In Sanskrit, it's called dagda bija ahankara, a ego which is like a burnt seed. And to understand this better, there's a video I just put out recently which will answer this question in great depth. And I think the video, the content of that video, I'm really happy with. And Prasanto, I think it will answer your question completely. The name of that video is Ego Death. And if you watch that video, I think your answer will be more than answered. It was helpful. All right, then just a couple more questions, and we'll conclude. This question comes from Jairam. Jairam lives in Malaysia. Please confirm that prana leaves, let's see, first introduction. I understand that sukshma sharira consists of mind, intellect, and ego. Actually consists of more than that. Sukshma sharira, in fact, I remember they break it down into like 19 different parts they go on there. And it starts with 5 kinds of prana, 5 kinds of life force. Then there are 5 organs of action, 5 sense organs, and then there are 4 kinds of mental faculties. So all of these, it adds up to 19 in traditional Vedanta texts. All of these 19 aspects make up the sukshma sharira. Question 1, please confirm that prana leaves a dead body and is not part of sukshma sharira. In traditional Vedanta texts, prana is part of the sukshma sharira. So how does prana enter a new body along with the sukshma sharira? After prana flows in the body, is it correct that prana and sukshma sharira do not enter the body at the same time? So the basic confusion is that prana in all Vedanta texts is considered to be an essential part of the sukshma sharira. Look at it like this. Sukshma sharira is that which distinguishes a dead body and a living body. There's a nice definition and a correct definition. So whatever a dead body lacks and whatever a living body has, that would determine what is that sukshma sharira, because it's the sukshma sharira that leaves the dead body. And that would definitely include prana, definitely include our karmendriyas, ability to move and act. It would include our jnanendriyas, our 5 senses. It would include all of our mental faculties. All of those collectively make up the sukshma sharira. And we'll make this, I think, the last question for today. This comes from Amit. Amit lives in India. Are self-realization and enlightenment the same? We use these terms interchangeably. Moksha, liberation, mukti, atma sakshatkara, the immediate recognition of your true nature as Atma. How about Brahma avapti, realization of Brahman? We have so many terms and terminology that we can use to describe enlightenment. Some say that, this is Amit's question, some say enlightenment happens at an instant and is permanent. But others say that enlightenment is a lifelong process. Okay, which is it? And I like questions like this where I can answer. If Amit asks, is it instant or is it gradual? I can easily answer the question, yes. Both. There is a moment of recognition when you discover, I am Satchidananda Atma. You gain Atma Jnanam, you gain self-knowledge, but that knowledge is accompanied by many impediments in the mind. These impediments in the mind include things like doubt, include things like vagueness. Do you think when you make that initial discovery, let me include one more and then I'll make the point. So these impediments in the mind, there are many ways of exploring this, but let's say the main impediments in the mind that follow discovery of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, the main impediments would be doubt, vagueness or lack of clarity, and habitual identification with your body and mind. This is really quite a big topic. We'll just do it very briefly here at the end of our satsang. So you gain that discovery of your true nature in a moment. Knowledge doesn't take place gradually. When you see me sitting here, you don't gradually come to know that Swamiji is sitting in the chair. That knowledge, any kind of knowledge, takes place instantly. But this knowledge is pretty simple to grasp. Atma Jnanam is more challenging. When you gain Atma Jnanam, knowledge of your true nature, it's not uncommon for doubts to remain, for there to be a lack of clarity, and most certainly for habitual identification with your body and mind to continue, because this wrong identification has been so deeply embedded in your thought. So in Advaita Vedanta, we have a threefold practice. And that threefold practice, you may have heard, Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Shravana is best defined as using the scriptures to guide your process of self-inquiry. So a process of self-inquiry guided by the teachings of Vedanta, that is a practice of Shravana, and Shravana culminates in the discovery of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. But as I just said, that discovery comes along, usually is accompanied by impediments, shortcomings of our mind. For the sake of removing those impediments, we have two more practices. To remove doubts and vagueness, we have a practice called manana. Manana means you continue studying, but here you're not studying for the sake of the initial discovery. Here you're studying the teachings of Vedanta for the sake of removing doubts and vagueness. And the final practice, in addition to Shravana and Manana, is Nididhyasana. We translate it as Vedantic contemplation. We're not going to discuss it in any detail here, but Vedantic contemplation is a specific practice meant to remove habitual identification with the body and mind. So, to answer Amit's question, yes, something takes place immediately and something takes place gradually. What takes place immediately is the discovery of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. What happens, and that takes place due to Shravana, and what happens gradually due to the practice of Manana and Nididhyasana, what happens is the gradual removal of doubts, gradual removal of lack of clarity, and gradual removal of habitual identification. That is Amit's question. There are a few more. I apologize. I think this is time to conclude. I look forward to you joining us for the next satsang. You can send me your questions by email. You'll find information in the description on how to do so. We'll end with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om. That's it. See you next time.